Right now, you're warm and didn't have to try. Strip that away. Bare skin, no fire, a winter cold enough to kill you in your sleep before you woke up. That wasn't a bad week for your ancestors. That was hundreds of thousands of years of normal, through real ice ages, with ice sheets burying entire continents. Every one of them survived long enough to have you. So how does a soft, hairless animal, built for African heat, survive the coldest weather this planet has ever thrown at a human? Let's be honest about what they faced, because Ice Age makes it sound like a cold afternoon. It wasn't. At its worst, roughly 26,000 to 19,000 years ago, ice buried Europe, Asia, and North America. The land was flat, frozen, wind-exposed, with barely a tree in sight, and food could vanish for months. Humans aren't built for this. No thick fur, no seal-like fat, no ability to slow the heartbeat and sleep through it like a bear. Strip a person's clothes off in real cold and they've got hours, not days. Mammoths had fur and fat. Cave bears hibernated. Reindeer could just walk somewhere warmer. Humans had none of it. On paper, we should have died first. What we had instead was a brain that could plan and hands that could build what our bodies were missing. That turned out to be just barely enough. It started with fire, because nothing else works without it. Humans had used fire for at least 300,000 to 400,000 years, and by the Ice Age it was the entire operation, not a convenience. Fire pits excavated in Ukraine turned out far more sophisticated than expected. One had burned at over 600 degrees Celsius, hotter than 1100 degrees Fahrenheit. When wood ran out on the open steppe, they burned fat and bone instead. Fire gave heat, cooked food, hardened tools, and stretched the short daylight. Fire doesn't travel with you, though. So humans did what no other animal could. They took the warmth off other animals and wore it. At first it was simple, skins draped over the shoulders. People were skinning bears for fur in northern Europe at least 300,000 years ago. We know from cut marks on bear paw bones exactly where you'd cut to pull a hide off clean. Those hides made wind and waterproof cloaks, but a loose skin still leaks heat through every gap, and that's not enough for a real ice age. If a loose hide wasn't enough, subscribe, because the actual fix that solved this problem is so small it sounds almost too simple to matter, and it might be the single most important invention in this entire story. The sewing needle. A thin sliver of bone or ivory with a tiny drilled hole showing up around 30,000 years ago. One researcher called it possibly the most important invention in human history, and the case is strong. It meant fitted clothing, sealed seams, layered garments, sleeves closed at the wrist. A blanket over your shoulders and an actual coat are completely different survival tools, and the needle turned one into the other. Early modern humans may well have had better-fitting cold-weather clothing than Neanderthals, which may have mattered more than almost anything else in that comparison. They didn't stop at fur either. Deer hide cut wind while staying soft enough for mittens and boots, and hunters rubbed tallow over their faces to seal skin against wind-driven heat loss. Bright snow brought its own threat, snow blindness, and northern hunters carved narrow slits into bone or wood, tying them over their eyes as the first sunglasses, made of bone. Forget the deep cave imagery. The real story is better. In what's now Ukraine and Russia, with no caves and almost no wood, people built with the resource lying everywhere, mammoth-bone. At Mezhyrich, archaeologists found round houses built almost entirely from mammoth bones and tusks, skulls and leg bones as foundation, ribs and tusks curved into a frame, hundreds of bones per structure, sunk into the ground and packed with hide, moss, and earth for insulation. The largest known example is roughly 18,000 years old, from the coldest stretch of the Ice Age, showing repeated use across hundreds of years, among the oldest deliberate architecture ever found. The engineering inside was clever. Many had a cold trap entrance, doorway dug lower than the sleeping area, cold air is heavier, sinking at the entrance, while warm air rose to where the family slept, a principle understood tens of thousands of years before anyone wrote down why it worked. They used snow itself as insulation, too. Thick snow walls kept a shelter's interior close to freezing even at 30 below, the igloo principle, long before anyone perfected it. Forests blocked enormous wind versus open ground, and gaps got packed with moss, mud, and pine pitch as caulk. Staying warm keeps you alive tonight. Winter's slower killer is hunger, since months could pass with almost nothing to gather. So they stored food ahead of time. A big kill got frozen naturally by the cold, smoked, dried into jerky, or buried in cool pits, with evidence of mammoth meat weighted down in cold ponds as a natural fridge. Nothing here needed power, and almost nothing went to waste. Hunting was organized around this. At a site in eastern France, hunters used fire and teamwork to drive entire herds of wild horses and reindeer into a natural trap at the same spot, repeatedly, for tens of thousands of years. Here's the part easy to miss. These people expected winter, structuring their year around it, while we're the ones caught off guard when the power goes out. They also leaned on each other. Far more people lived under one roof, in far less space, than most modern people would tolerate, since body heat is a real, measurable source when bodies pack close together. People living alone, especially the elderly, were usually first to die in a hard, cold snap, simply because no one was there to share warmth. This wasn't some peaceful utopia, though. Resources were brutally limited, and there's real evidence some ancient humans turned to cannibalism as a last resort when food ran out entirely. A grim but honest part of this history. Centuries later, medieval European and Russian peasants brought livestock into the ground floor of their homes in the worst winters, letting the animals' body heat rise to warm the family above, living on top of their own furnace. Some human bodies adapted directly. The Yaghan people, at the southern tip of South America, lived in freezing conditions wearing almost no clothing, bodies running hotter, generating more internal heat, using a deep squatting position that tucked in arms and legs to cut heat loss. Their solution to the cold wasn't a coat. It was their own physiology, turned up. Then there's the strangest possibility of all, hibernation. At Spain's Cima de los Huesos, or Pit of Bones, researchers studying human ancestors from roughly 430,000 years ago found bone damage in strange seasonal cycles, growth that stopped and started, signs of insufficient sunlight, teenagers with interrupted growth matching what's seen in hibernating animals whose bodies slow down and feed on themselves. Some scientists propose these early humans, lacking enough fat reserves for a brutal winter, may have retreated into caves and slowed their bodies into something like deep sleep to wait it out. It's genuinely contested. Other researchers argue the damage has different explanations. But the idea remains seriously debated, not dismissed. For hundreds of thousands of years, making it to spring was never guaranteed. Every winter was a test you could fail, and failing meant dying. Here's the part that actually lands. In a couple thousand years, nothing on this timeline, we went from stacking mammoth bones into a house to pressing a button for heat. The deadliest force our ancestors ever faced is now something we complain about on the walk to a warm car.